We're going to talk about Pentridge Jail today, and it's without doubt probably one of the most infamous jails of Victoria. Before we start, I do of course want to say that everything that I'm talking about today is my own personal opinion. All of the research and the information that I'm going to talk about today is my own research, and of course I do want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Wurrungun people as well. We are on their land, and of course we do need to recognise that this is their land. We have some really interesting stories around Pentridge. There's lots of theories and mysteries about the jail, but it's generally known for some very harsh and brutal living situations. Pentridge is huge. If any of you have been there in Coburg, and if you've walked around, you'll see those great big massive blue stone bricks. I once read somewhere that if you took each brick down and laid them end to end, it would take you all the way from here to Sydney and back. And that's a whole lot of bricks. And it explains why it is always so cold in there. If you've ever been into Pentridge, it's really cold. It keeps the heat out. But I think it would have been terrifying walking into Pentridge. You think of all of those really famous prisoners that Victoria's has had. We talk about things like Swizzy Taylor, Peter Brazell, Mr. Bluey Brazell, of course Chopper Read. Everyone knows about Chopper Read. If you actually get to come on the tour with us, we'll take you into Chopper Read's cell. He's known for pinching the bottom of ladies, so if you want to have a little go with Chopper, you can do. It's quite fun in there, actually, in Chopper's little cell. All of those big famous prisoners have all stepped through Pentridge, so to actually walk around there it can be a little bit terrifying. But some of the pictures that I've got here, now I'm hoping you can see this. I hope. So, can I see it just here? Yes, I can. So, right here, this is generally where we start our tour, and it's also just parallel to Sydney Road. So you have this section here, and then also this section right here. So over there you go. So it was a big jail, a very large jail, and the section that we go around as a tour is D Division, and that was essentially the remand centre. So everybody who has been in jail at Pentridge has spent time in D Division in the remand centre. So our first story today is this person. Now, this is Mr. Eddie Leonski, and someone just said, is that the guy from World War II? Yes it is. Well done to that person. Now, Eddie Leonski, he looks very clean cut. He looks like someone I'd swipe right to on Tinder. He looks quite good. He's got good teeth. It's an important thing. He's got nice hair. Doesn't look too bad. Eddie Leonski goes by another name, and his name is the Brownout Strangler. So Eddie Leonski was messing around here in Melbourne in 1942. Now, he was here in Melbourne along with thousands of other American GIs. And they were all here just in case something happened to Australia during World War II, and they wanted to protect the country. Now, the Australians and Melburnians weren't so happy that the fact that all of their loved ones had been shipped out, where they're actually on the front line, and then you got these Americans coming in, and they are underworked, they're overpaid, they're oversexed, and they're over here. 4 very toxic energies that people were carrying around. And especially when it came to May of 1942, 3 women were found dead on the streets of Melbourne, each with strangulation marks around their necks. Chunks of their hair had been pulled out. Most of them were fully clothed from the waist down. From the waist up, some of their clothes had been torn. The women didn't exactly look alike. They didn't have any obvious traits in the sense of they were all fairly different. So the question was, what was happening? Who was committing all of these crimes? And more importantly, why were they committing these crimes? Now, Eddie Leonski, we'll go back to him. So, American guy, he's from New Jersey, and he's a really anxious little boy. He would calm himself by listening to his mother sing. By all accounts, she had this really nice little singing voice. But of course, Eddie Leonski is not in America, he's over here. And so he's generally seen as a bit of a loser. Not many people like him because he's very introverted and he's very calm. People think he's a little bit weird, except when he drinks. And when he drinks, he gets this Jekyll and Hyde personality split. So you get someone who is placid and quiet and introverted, and then suddenly you get this guy who's doing handstands on the bar and he's doing cartwheels on tables and he's drinking, and he could drink up to 20 pints a night, all with whiskey chasers. If I did that, I would be on the ground 100% dead. There's no even question about it. But Eddie Leonski, he keeps on going. And he would get to that point where he would be so drunk that he would go back into himself, like almost re-introverted. And he would go into a little corner, he'd carry on drinking, and he'd start emitting this really high-pitched, very feminine voice. So people started scuttling over to him and just kind of listening to see what's going on. And they could have sworn that they were listening to a woman sing. As soon as he started to sing, it sounded just like a woman. I kind of liken it a little bit to the Bee Gees. You've got this big burly dude, and then he's, you know, singing these beautiful, beautiful feminine sounds. So everyone's there just going, drink more, Eddie, sing more, you know, we want to hear you sing. So we drink more and more and more. And when he got enough attention, of course, the ladies started to come over to him, and he would allow himself to be seduced. How very kind of him. He would allow himself to be seduced, and then off he would walk into the distance with the woman that he chose. They'd walk off into the mist, and she would never be seen again. Now, this happened 3 weekends in a row, each Friday night, and every time Eddie Leonski would go out, he'd come home, he'd go into his tent, and he'd be crying, like inconsolable. He'd be saying, I've done something wrong, I've done something terrible, and someone needs to stop me. And his tent mate just goes, nah, you're just being an idiot. Don't be silly, you're just being dramatic. The next weekend, the exact same thing started to happen. And he goes crying to his tent mate, I've done something wrong, someone needs to stop me. And his tent mate goes, oh, maybe there is something a little bit weird here. I'll go and report it. But nobody did anything. So again, the third weekend, another woman is found dead. Eddie Leonski is found half naked in a puddle in Albert Park, just kind of rocking to himself, saying, someone needs to stop me, I'm doing something bad. So the police take him aside and they question, they say, what is it that you think you've been doing wrong? And so they present him with the idea that maybe he's been committing these murders, and he starts to think, it is me, I have been doing this, I've killed these people. So they say, why? Why have you been doing it? And he says, I wanted to own their soul and I wanted to own their voice. Which is very, very confusing. So because he had this beautiful feminine voice, he wanted to collect these voices, these women's voices, and he thought the best way to do that was to take their soul. So when he had a woman come up to him, they'd walk off into the distance around Albert Park. He'd push them against the wall. He'd put his hands around their throat. He would put his knee onto their chest. He'd pull their hair back so much that chunks will be pulled out. And when they're literally gasping for their last breath, he would put his lips onto their lips and he'd suck out their last breath. Because he thought if he sucked in their breath, their soul and their voice, next time he went to sing in the bar, he would be able to emit those beautiful sounds coming from these beautiful women. Which is very, very creepy. I kind of think of it like a really messed up Ursula from Little Mermaid, you know, sucking in all of these voices. These are the women, and I've got the dates and the names on top there as well. So you've got Minnie Hoskins, Pauline, Buchan and Ivy McLeod. Now I know that they look older in those pictures, but they're just black and white. Most of the women were in their late 20s. Eddie Leonski, incidentally, was a late teenager. I can't exactly remember how old he was. Now Eddie Leonski is still around. He's in cell number 52, and if you come into our tour at Pentridge, we actually take people in there. Now, when I'm telling my story, it's one of the first places that we go to on the tour. So I get my group all around me, and I ask if anyone would like to go inside the cell. Now, by this point, I haven't told anybody why we're at cell 52 or even anything about Eddie Leonski. So I find some very nice, willing young lady, and I put them into the cell, close the door, and then I very quietly go into the corner and I tell the story of Eddie Leonski. Now, normally people come out after about 2 or 3 minutes and just kind of say, I felt really uneasy. And we get a lot of activity in that room. I get people coming up to me at the end of the tour saying that they heard this weird whistling in their ear, and I get them to mimic the sound. And it is normally very similar to a kind of swirling noise. It's really creepy. And every time that happens, the hair goes on the back of my neck, and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening. There was one particular day, I'm going to show you this photo, I'm going to have to bring it up now. I had a lady on the tour, and it was just like any other normal day. I'm thinking, great, what a nice big group, this is going to be great. So she goes into the cell, close the door, I tell my whole story about Eddie Leonski, and she comes out maybe after about 5-8 minutes, and I say, did you get anything? Did anything happen? She went, no, nothing at all. It was all fine. So I went, oh, okay, fine. So she stood there looking up at the ceiling, just kind of fanning around. And then I catch a glimpse of her neck, and I freak out, and everybody else freaks out. And I took a picture. So if you look very, very closely, I'll zoom in. If you look very, very closely on her neck, you can see those hand marks around her neck. She was in there for, yeah, 8 minutes or so. There you go, you can see the rest of her neck there. It's on a bit of a loop. It's terrifying. So Eddie Leonski is still at it. And I was kind of saying to her, like, did you feel anything? She went, no, I felt a bit hot, but I was in a small room. So I just wanted to dig a little bit more and know a little bit more about her. And that's when she told me she's a professional singer. So, of course, Eddie Leonski is still at it. He's still trying to find women for those beautiful voices. We've got all sorts of stories coming out of Cell 52. A lady that heard those swirling noises, and she was completely pale, and she left the tour straight after that. And she rang in the next day to our poor head office and said that her husband said that she looked like she'd had the life sucked out of her. Just, I couldn't imagine if that happened to me. Yeah, a little bit disturbing and really, really, really unnerving, actually. Have you seen an actual ghost there? Yes, Fiona, I have. I have some pictures. Would you like to see them? Now, this is the picture that I have of Chopper Read. He likes to stay right outside of his cell. He kind of comes out, he's got a cigarette in hand, and he leans up against the wall, and he just watches. And as soon as we come into the cell where he's leaning, he runs away back into his cell. So, oh, you can kind of just about see it. You see just there? That, oh, I've got to put that in the right angle, there we go. Sort of, sorry. That is our picture of Chopper Read. You can just see his shadow. You can see a little bit more there. I want to get the right angle with the light. Oh, there you go, you can kind of see just there. We do get activity in his cell. Definitely come along to that one. You'll be able to hear what I call the Chopper Read shuffle. He was known for just kind of putting out his cigarette and putting his cigarette out with his foot. So if you hang around there long enough, you kind of hear this, but with shoes on the ground, obviously. It's very faint, but it's very recognizable. What paranormal experience have you had that sticks out at Pentridge or otherwise? At Pentridge, thank you, Tara, actually, for that question. At Pentridge, I think the thing that really freaked me out was the hands on the neck. You'll never be able to get that, and just the look of panic in her face. Oh, and everyone else, it really put my hairs on the back of my neck. Are you able to recommend any books to read about these prisoners? Yes, I can. I can recommend 2 books, actually. Well, no, I can recommend 1 book. It is written by our wonderful owner. She's called Jackie. She's written a book about Pentridge. It's just called The 12 Ghosts or The 12 Stories of Pentridge. She's written it herself. Of course, it's all information that we've all researched on our own and given to her, or she's researched them themselves. So please do look out for that one. All right, guys, so I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a safe night. Please stay safe. Wear your face mask and wash your hands, for goodness sake. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Bye.